Well, hello again. This is our fourth and final summer video for the Monroe County Historical Society Summer Program for Children. I'm Joyce Wiggins, and I'd just like to say, on behalf of the Society and myself, we could not have done this without all of you. Whether or not you contributed to our videos, you sang, you played an instrument, did a demonstration, staged scenes, sent photos, sent video clips, lent material, helped share the videos, watched, or simply encouraged someone else to take part. Your part made this summer one we'll never forget. Furthermore, we now have a new file of unique history to store away for another generation. Thanks again for all your help. This fourth video is called Back to School. It's a timely theme, I might add, as many of you have already started or are getting ready to go back to school soon. We're going to take a look at schools in the past and schools in the present. As a retired school teacher, the end of August always holds many memories of days gone by for me, and my friend Joyce is shaking her head. Her too. Where there were children, there have been schools. So we're going to take a look at some of those and see how things have changed over the years, especially how schools have changed over the years. Where there are people, there are children. And where there are children, there is the need to educate them. Early people on our planet Earth took the time to teach their children skills it took to survive in the world. Then as the world expanded and communication became more important, people began to record things, whether it was drawn in a picture or written down on some form of paper or published in a book. It became obvious that to succeed in life, one needed to be able to read. As adults learned to read the written word, they then realized that it was going to be important for their children to do so also. Let's fast forward in education to the United States after we gained our independence from England. Schools in the first 13 colonies depended mostly on what the parents could afford. Rich families could afford to hire private tutors for their children's education, while many folks not so wealthy couldn't read or write themselves, so they taught their children skills of a trade. At that time, girls were expected to learn manners and how to become a proper wife. Boys were often apprenticed to carpenters or cobblers or blacksmiths or any other kind of craft or trade that they needed to learn, and they were learning a skill. An apprentice is kind of like a student learner. You worked for a person, and that person taught you everything he knew or she knew about her trade. But by the early 1800s, pioneers were moving west in large groups. Do you know what year Ohio became a state? Did I hear someone say 1803? That is correct. Pioneers moving to Ohio faced a lot of new experiences. When groups of pioneers settled in an area, often the first building built in the settlement was a meeting house that could be used as a church or as a school, or both. School years in early days were very short. They began after fall harvest and stopped before the crops were planted in the spring. I am sure there were also times in the winter that children couldn't get to school because of severe weather. Throughout the 1800s, there were many one-room schools built. They were small. I'll read a little from a book about a girl named Kirsten to get a description of what school was like in 1824. Kirsten was a pioneer. Kirsten hurried down the path beside her cousin Elizabeth. In one hand she carried a lunch in her wooden box. On the other, she held her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "You're walking too fast," Kirsten said. But Elizabeth could not slow down. "Mr. Coogan will be angry if we're late. He is really strict." Mr. Coogan had been her teacher since she was 9. She loved to tell stories about how fierce he was. In fact, ever since July, when Kirsten and her family had come to live on their farm, Elizabeth and her sister Anna talked about Mr. Coogan and Powder Keg School. Now it was November. The harvest was over, and it was time for the fall term to begin. Today would be Kirsten's first day in an American school. Kirsten walked as fast as she could to keep up with Elizabeth's longer stride. Her boots puffed up dust. Anna, who was just 7, tagged farther behind. "Wait for me," she called. "I want to stop for a drink of water." Kirsten and Elizabeth stopped beside the stream. A light mist rose from the clear water, and a few yellow leaves floated on it. Kirsten stopped and put her fingertip into a deer track in the sand. Oh, how she wished she could stay right here instead of going to school. "If you mind Mr. Coogan, he will like you," Elizabeth said, "but he gets really angry when the big boys fight." Anna wiped her mouth on the back of her hand. Her round cheeks were rosy from running along the path. "He's mean, but he'll never hit you, Kirsten. You're too nice, don't worry." Kirsten let out a long breath. "I'm not really worried," she said softly. But she was dizzy, almost the way she felt on the ship just before she got seasick. "Does your stomach hurt?" Anna asked. "When I'm scared, my stomach hurts and flutters like there's a bird inside me." Kirsten put her hand to her waist. Yes, her stomach did feel full of wings. Butterflies, maybe. She hadn't been able to eat the pancakes Mama had made for breakfast. "My stomach hurts a little bit," she said. "I was really scared the first day I went to school," Anna said. "I wondered if the others would like me. It's hard to be the new little girl." Elizabeth slipped her arm through Kirsten's as they started along the path. "Just do what we do, Kirsten, and you'll get along fine." Kirsten sighed. "But I can't do what you do. I only speak a little bit of English, and I can't write a word of it. I won't fit in at all." "School only lasts till 4 o'clock, Anna added. "When it's over, we'll stop at our fort and play for a few minutes." She darted off to hide their dolls in a secret hideaway under a cherry tree. And then she broke off a sprig of bittersweet and handed Kirsten a few of the waxy berries. "We can pretend these are real berries for our doll cakes." "Come, come," Elizabeth said. "I hear the school bell." She began to run. And suddenly, before Kirsten was ready, they were in the clearing in front of a large log cabin that was called Powder Keg School. The last children were just going in the door. Powder Keg School didn't look any different from the log cabin that Kirsten and her family lived in on their uncle's farm. But the school had more windows and a stovepipe stuck up in the center of the roof. "There's the outhouse," Anna said. She pointed to a small shed behind the cabin. "The girls use it before the boys do at recess. I won't let any boys peek at you, I promise." Kirsten hadn't thought of that. What a lot of things she had to worry about. She peered around Elizabeth's shoulders into the schoolhouse. Children were finding places to sit on the benches that lined the walls. Only her brothers, Lars and Peter, looked familiar. Lars sat with the other big boys. Peter was with the younger boys, and there were some even smaller than he was. Elizabeth pulled off her shawl and hung it on a peg, and Kirsten draped hers over it. For a moment she let her forehead rest against the comforting wool that smelled of home, wood smoke. Then she turned and looked around. A pot-bellied wood stove sat in the open space in the center of the room. But instead of the fearsome Mr. Coogan, a young woman in a black dress sat at the teacher's chair by the stove. She watched Kirsten and her cousins as they walked to the benches on the girls' side of the room, but she did not smile a welcome. "We have a new teacher," Elizabeth whispered as she and Kirsten sat down. The young teacher stood and tapped the stove with a ruler to get everyone's attention. Her dark hair was parted cleanly in the middle, her chin was up, and her shoulders were back like a soldier. "I am Miss Winston," she said in a crisp voice. "I've come west from Camden, Maine. I'm to be your teacher because Mr. Coogan was injured when his horse threw him this summer." She looked around to see if everybody heard her. The boys were whispering. "That's Amos Anderson," Elizabeth whispered as she pointed to the one that was talking the loudest. Miss Winston faced Amos. "You will not talk out of turn in my classroom." Amos grinned and looked down at his big hands. He had broad shoulders and the beginnings of a black mustache. Kirsten thought he looked more like a man than a boy. Now you know my name, Miss Winston continued, but I don't know yours. I'd like each of you to come forward and introduce yourself to me politely. We are ladies and gentlemen here at Powder Keg School. Anna was the first of the girls to go forward. She made a quick curtsy and said, Anna Larson, ma'am. Miss Wilson nodded. Very good. Next, please. Kirsten tried to remember the names of the girls, but her head buzzed like it was full of bees. She didn't want to walk out there in the middle of that room with everyone watching her. She was the last girl to take her turn. The floor seemed to move under her as she stepped forward. She kept her gaze on her dusty boots and made her curtsy. Kirsten Larson, she muttered under her breath. Before she could escape back to the bench, Miss Winston said firmly, Say Kirsten Larson, ma'am. Ma'am, Kirsten repeated, but the word didn't sound right. She felt a blush prickle at the base of her throat. Miss Winston bent to look at Kirsten right in the eyes. Do you speak English? She asked. A little, ma'am. The buzz in Kirsten's ear was so loud she could hardly hear her own words. But she heard one of the girls giggle at her halting English. She's our cousin, Miss Winston, Anna said. She just came to America last summer. We speak Swedish at home, ma'am. Miss Winston raised her eyebrows and said, Ah, well, you will speak English in school, Kirsten, and you will begin with the easiest lessons. Anna will share her book with you and help you. Do you understand? Kirsten nodded. Say I understand, ma'am, Miss Winston reminded her. If you're going to learn English, you might as well practice it. Practice makes perfect. Now it was Amos who laughed out loud at Kirsten. Miss Winston's eyes narrowed, and she motioned for Kirsten to sit down again on the bench. Then Miss Winston whirled around, raised her ruler over her head, and brought it smashing down on top of the iron stove. The crack went through the room like a shot of a rifle. My father could not be a ship's captain if he weren't in charge of his crew, and I can't be a teacher if I'm not in charge of my students. This is your first lesson. Miss Winston is the subject of that sentence. Hit is the verb. The direct object of hit is the stove. Be careful that the direct object of hit isn't the student. Do you have any questions? Now no one was laughing. No one said a single thing. Good. Now you boys please come forward and introduce yourselves. Remember, you are gentlemen. The littlest boys went first this time. They spoke their name and bowed. Even Peter, who was only 5, took his turn easily. He had learned a lot of English without even seeming to try, Kirsten thought. It was Lars's turn. He said, I'm Lars Larson, ma'am, in a loud voice that everyone could easily hear. Lars wasn't afraid of anything, not even this teacher who seemed so strict. Mama had cut his hair last night, and it hugged his head like a bright cap. Amos, with his dark mustache and eyes the color of blue paint, came in last. He was much taller than Miss Winston. He looked almost as tall as her uncle. Amos Anderson, ma'am, he said, and he bobbed his head instead of bowing. What reading book are you using, Amos? Miss Winston asked him. I finished the 3rd one, ma'am, and he winked at the girl's bench. I'm 19, Amos drawled, same as you. Miss Winston tapped her palm with her ruler and considered him. Yes, Amos, I'm 19 too, but I am the teacher and you are the student. I'm here to help you read and do sums the way a man must do if he wants to make his way in this world. Please set a good example for the others. Amos's face turned bright red. He looked at Miss Winston closely. Why don't I go draw a bucket of water so the children can all have a drink before we start reading, he said. Thank you, Amos. That's a good idea, Miss Winston said. Amos grabbed one of the buckets, and through the small window, Kirsten saw him run like a deer toward the stream. Miss Winston stood with her back to the door. While we wait for our drink of water, we'll sing a song. Singing is a very good exercise. It brings fresh air into our lungs. Keeping time with her ruler, she sang, Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. Her voice was firm and clear, and everyone sang along. Home. That word was as sweet as clover honey on Kirsten's lips. Sometimes she wished she were back at home in Sweden, where she was comfortable, where she could be herself, where she knew everyone and knew what everyone was saying. Or maybe even here at home with Mama in her cozy cabin. Anywhere. anywhere but here with Miss Winston in Powder Keg School. Soon the singing stopped and Amos was back with a bucket of water. He sat it on the bench and handed Anna the dipper so she could get a drink. Girls first, he said, as though he were in charge here, not Miss Winston. If Miss Winston minded, she didn't show it. She was busy passing out the books, small slates, and slate pencils. Anna leaned against Kirsten's shoulder and opened her book to the alphabet section. She ran her finger down the page to the page of a dog. D, dog. Doesn't this dog look just like our brownie when he smells a fox? Anna said. See, here are the letters that spell dog. Copy them on your slate like I do. Kirsten took her slate and did as Anna told her to. Once in a while, Anna licked her finger and erased one of Kirsten's letters and had her start again. Kirsten pressed her tongue against her upper lip and tried hard. Around her, the other children worked at their reading. Some of them were reading out loud. When Miss Winston came to check Kirsten's work, she said, "It seems Anna is a good teacher. Can you read what you've written here?" Dog, Kirsten said proudly. She hoped Miss Winston might say she's done well. Instead, Miss Winston pointed to Anna's slate. "You must learn to write, 'The dog can run,' as Anna has done," she said. "I love school, don't I? Don't you?" Anna whispered. Kirsten glanced up at the dusty window panes. It was still early morning. The first day of school was going to be a long one. She sighed and wrote again on her slate. D-O-G. First days of school are always exciting and kind of scary too. If you've been there before, you know what we're talking about. Now let's take a look at some modern day kids going back to school on the first day.
The driver on the bus says, "Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back." The driver on the bus says, "Welcome back on the first day of school."
We actually have a one-room schoolhouse museum here in Woodsfield, and I've taken some pictures of things that look very different from what we see in school today. Do you remember Amos from our story that we just read? And he went to the stream for water in a wooden pail. Well, in the early 1900s, the pail might have looked like this one. Notice there's a dipper and a tin cup. Children would have shared the dipper or the cup. In my mind, I just heard somebody say yuck. We are so very worried about spreading germs, aren't we? In our schools during COVID, water fountains are even too germy to use. Children will drink water from their own bottles so germs don't spread. When my mom started to school in 1930, her dad did not want her to drink out of the dipper shared by all. So he taught her to make a little cone cup out of a piece of paper. And then on her 6th birthday in March that year, she got a collapsible tin metal cup to keep in her desk for safe drinking. School days were usually between 6 or 7 hours long in those days. And that meant children had to take their lunch to eat at noon. Remember that Kirsten had a wooden lunchbox. Here are a couple other lunchboxes that could have been used by children in one-room schools. The basket would have been for a large family of children. It might have been carried by the oldest child or girl in the family, and at lunchtime she would pass out the food in the basket to her other brothers and sisters. The little metal lunch bucket would be for 1 or 2 children to carry to school. Sometimes lunch was a baked potato, a piece of buttered bread and cheese, or a piece of salt pork. Some days an apple might make that lunch really special. There were no Ziploc bags. There were no fancy little containers to put the food in. Some things had to be wrapped in a small cloth, napkin, or maybe even a handkerchief. And children would not have taken a drink with them to school in those early years, but they would have gone to that water bucket for a drink after they ate their lunch. Here are some pictures of what lunchboxes look like today. Today, many children eat lunch prepared by the cooks at their school. But in one-room schools, there were no cooks or cafeterias. Once or twice a year, maybe, mothers of the school children might prepare a special lunch and take it to the school for all to enjoy a picnic. I've been saying this one-room school quite a bit. We'd better talk about exactly what that means. Children usually started to school when they were 6, and they finished when they were about 16. There were first graders through 8th graders in most of the schools. All the children would be in the same room, thus it's called one-room school. There was one teacher who was expected to teach every grade level to every student at the same in the same day. There were little desks for the first graders and big desks for the 8th graders and every size in between. Here is a picture of some of the different sizes of desks. My dad went to school until he was 16, but he was still in the 8th grade. He did 8th grade work for 3 years, and finally the teacher said, "Delbert, we cannot teach you anymore. You either need to go to the big high school in town or you need to stop school." And so he stopped school to help his dad farm. At the beginning of the school year, every year, one of the most exciting things to do is buy new school supplies. Here are some pictures to show some school supplies that children in one-room schools used. Slates and slate pencils. Crayons, paints, and pencil boxes. And here are some early pencils with no erasers. When learning to write cursive, children used ink pens, and so there was no erasing mistakes then either. When I taught school in 3rd grade, I asked my children not to erase when they were practicing their letters in cursive. I wanted to be able to see their mistakes and be able to help them. I also didn't want to have holes in the paper because they would erase over and over and over to get it right. We hear many stories of grandparents saying, "When I was your age, I had to walk miles to and from school." In the first 30 years of 1900, that was indeed the case. Most children in Monroe County had a school within 3 miles of their home. But roads at that time were not good and could only be traveled in dry weather or very cold weather when the ground was frozen. It was hard even to walk on those roads in wet weather. Children probably ran across fields or beside the road to get there in all sorts of weather. If they were lucky, some farmer might hitch up a wagon or a sleigh to a horse and haul children to school. In later years, if there were not enough children in an area to have their own school, then those children were transported to the closest school on another ridge or in another valley by a hired driver, and by that time they were driving Model T cars. Buses started to run in the late 20s, but then mostly to take the high school kids to town, not the kids that lived in the country that were going to one-room schools. Brownsville School in Benton Township was a special school to many in the Byers family. This replica of Brownsville School was made by Paul Byers. Paul drove bus for many years in Monroe County. Here's a picture of students outside the Brownsville School in 1948. This is the oldest school bus I have ever seen. By the way, the students were photographed by that bus because they had perfect attendance that year. And that was probably made possible by the fact that there was a bus to get them to school. The Brownsville School closed in 1964. Enjoy this next part of photos of old one-room schools, bigger 4-room schools, and high schools from the past. If you are interested in where these schools were in Monroe County, go to our website, which I will share in the credits at the end of the video.
The driver on the bus says, "Move on back, move on back, move on back." The driver on the bus says, "Move on back, all the way to school." The students on the bus will all sit still, all sit still, all sit still. The students on the bus will all sit still all the way to school. The kids on the bus will all get off, all get off, all get off. The kids on the bus will all get off when they get to school.
There are other kinds of schools or classes that children enjoy. Many children today enjoy dance and gymnastic classes. Remember when we met Isabel in the birthday celebrations video? I told you we were going to get to know her better in the Back to School video. Isabel Palmer was the American Girl of the Year in 2014, and she was taking ballet lessons at a local studio. She had an older sister who was really talented, and Isabel struggled to be as good as her sister was in ballet. She didn't become good until she realized how much hope and enjoyment she was bringing folks in hospitals and nursing homes when she danced for them. So she began to dance to bring joy to others. She became very good and was even given the opportunity to go away to a school, to a very famous school of dance in New York. Enjoy the following clips of Isabel and some real-life local sisters who also enjoy ballet. In 2020, schools have been canceled since March because of the coronavirus. And now, as schools are starting back for the new year, things may be very different. When children are taught at home, we often refer to that as homeschooling. Homeschools usually involve some form of computer learning, which we now call virtual learning. Children this spring all got a taste of virtual learning when schools were forced to close because of the pandemic. Here are some of those children this spring learning at home. Watch for art projects, children doing paperwork, and yes, children learning on the computer.
Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Good morning, dear children. Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Good morning, dear children. Good morning to you.
This fall, school has already started for some, and others will start next week or later. Some children will continue being homeschooled. Some will be doing virtual learning provided by a public school system, and some will be attending in-person classes in their school buildings. Here are some things that are happening this fall as children and young adults go back to school, high school, and college. Wearing masks, staying a safe distance apart, setting up classrooms with desks at home, as well as packing good lunches to eat in individual classrooms are just some of the things that may be a little bit different this year.
read the problem.
So I added 3, and then I added 2, and then I added 2 more. Then I got 7. Missing words in each sentence.
Good.
See the boy play. Can the girl play too? Yes. Yes. She can play too. Yes. She can?
Yeah.
She can.
I'll close by saying that wherever you are this fall, do your best and learn as much as you possibly can. I love you, and I will be praying for you as well as for your teachers.
The